Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something I think we all might have felt at some point, alienation. Specifically, how Marx and Engels developed their ideas about alienation under capitalism.
Okay.
And we're doing this by looking at some of their personal letters and writings, a really unique way to kind of see their ideas as they develop over time.
Yeah, and what's fascinating about this is, with these personal documents, you see their struggles, their frustrations, even glimpses into their daily lives.
Yeah.
Things you wouldn't typically find in, their more formal published works.
I'm excited to see what we find.
Yeah.
Let's start with that 1844 letter from Engels.
Oh, okay.
He had just visited Marx in Paris, and he was fired up about tackling what he called the present-day folly.
Right.
So what do you think he was getting at there?
Well, it's interesting because even in this early letter, we can see the beginnings of their critique of capitalism. Engels seems to be hinting at this idea of egoism as this driving force in society, a consequence of the system itself.
And then just a few years later, they co-write the German ideology and really lay out their thoughts on alienation. And there's that powerful quote, "The division of labor offers us the first example of how man's own deed becomes an alien power opposed to him, which enslaves him instead of being controlled by him." I mean, that really gets to the heart of it.
Yeah, that quote really captures the essence of alienation.
Yeah.
It's this idea that, our own work, our own creations become this separate force that controls us, instead of the other way around.
Yeah.
Have you ever, poured your heart into a project at work only to feel like it's not really yours anymore?
Totally.
It's become something separate from you.
I think that most of us have felt that at some point, yeah.
Yeah.
You put in the effort, the creativity, but then it just feels like it takes on a life of its own.
Exactly.
And you're just this small part of a much larger machine.
Exactly. And that feeling of disconnection, that lack of control, that's a key element of what Marx and Engels were getting at with this idea of alienation.
Right.
And then this idea continues to develop in the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844, where Marx really dives deeper into the different facets of alienation.
Now, in 1846, we see their correspondence with Annenkoff. And here, Marx is really fiercely criticizing Proudhon's Philosophie de la Misère.
Right.
He specifically calls out Proudhon for misunderstanding the historical development of machinery. So why was this critique so important to Marx?
Well, it's crucial because for Marx, understanding the historical evolution of technology and its impact on labor was essential to understanding alienation. He argued that, if you don't grasp how technology emerges, how it changes the nature of work, you can't fully understand how workers become alienated from their labor.
So, it's those dominoes. One misunderstanding leads to another.
Precise. And all of this builds towards Capital, published in 1867, where Marx very plainly states, the product is the property of the capitalist and not that of the laborer, its immediate producer.
So, putting that in simple terms, the person who does the work doesn't own what they create. It belongs to the person who owns the business,
Yeah, the person who hired them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But how does that tie into the broader theme of alienation?
Well, think of it this way, you dedicate your time, your energy, your skill to creating something, but it doesn't belong to you.
Right.
You're separated from the fruits of your labor. Imagine pouring your heart into a painting, only to have someone else sign their name on it and claim it as their own.
Right.
You're essentially cut off from what you've created.
It's got to be a deeply frustrating and disheartening experience.
Yeah.
It's no wonder this feeling of powerlessness is so central to this idea of alienation.
Right, and it highlights that lack of control and ownership that we were talking about. But then in the letters on the critique of political economy, Engels introduces an interesting nuance.
Okay.
He writes, the economic situation is the basis, but other elements also exercise their influence upon the course of the historical struggles.
So it's not as simple as just economics. There's more to it than that.
Exactly. So while economics is foundational, there are these other factors like politics, ideology, even individual actions that all contribute to the historical development of societies and the experience of alienation. It's a more complex picture than one might initially assume.
It seems like these letters are offering us a lot more than just kind of these surface-level explanations of Marx and Engels' theories. We're getting these glimpses into how their ideas evolved and the complexities they were grappling with.
Yeah, and that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. We're uncovering these layers of their thinking that are often overlooked.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
And with each letter, we get a clearer picture of what they were trying to convey.
Absolutely.
What else have we got in store? What other puzzle pieces are waiting to be found in these letters?
Well, in that same year, 1844, there was this book that really caught Engels' attention, and he was, discussing it in his letters.
Right.
It was called Der Einzige und sein Eigentum by Max Stirner.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
And who was this Stirner character? What about him got Engels so worked up?
So Stirner was part of the young Hegelians,
Okay.
just like Marx and Engels were in their early days.
Yeah.
But his book advocated for this radical individualism,
Okay.
arguing for the absolute supremacy of the individual ego.
So that sounds almost like, every man for himself kind of thinking.
Exactly.
Not very communist, is it?
Exactly. That's why Engels called it the perfect expression of present-day folly. He saw it as the culmination of the egoism inherent in capitalist society, the same egoism he mentioned earlier.
So how did Marx and Engels respond to this egoistic man idea?
Yeah.
Did they just dismiss it as completely off base?
Not at all. They saw it as a challenge,
Okay.
an opportunity to sharpen their own arguments. Engels even argued that, you could use Stirner's logic against him to show that even the most self-interested individual
Okay.
would eventually be pushed towards communism.
Okay, now you got to explain that one.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're saying extreme individualism somehow leads to communism.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, imagine a world where everyone is completely out for themselves.
Okay.
A world of pure egoism, right? What would happen? It would be chaos.
Right.
No cooperation, no trust, just constant competition and conflict.
Yeah.
So even the most hardcore individualist would eventually realize that they're better off in a society where people work together, share resources, and create, a more stable and less chaotic environment.
So basically, taking Stirner's idea to its extreme, you end up with a situation where communism actually makes more sense, even for the individual.
That's the clever argument that Engels was making.
Yeah.
He was showing that even when you start from this premise of pure individualism,
Yeah.
the logic eventually leads you to a more cooperative, more communist solution.
That's some pretty sophisticated argumentation.
Yeah.
It really shows how Marx and Engels were constantly engaging with different ideas, refining their own thinking through debate and critique.
Absolutely. And as they dug deeper into these ideas, they began to see how this concept of alienation went far beyond just economics.
Right.
For instance, in a letter from 1868, Marx wrote that capitalism cuts from under its feet the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates products.
Okay, that sounds pretty complex.
Yeah.
Can you break that down a little bit? What did he mean by that?
So he was highlighting these inherent contradictions within capitalism.
Okay.
He was saying, the more the bourgeoisie innovates and develops technology to increase profits, the more they create the conditions that could ultimately undermine their own system.
So it's like they're planting the seeds of their own destruction without even realizing it?
In a sense, yes.
Wow.
The very forces that drive capitalism forward also contain the seeds of its potential downfall.
That's a pretty mind-blowing concept.
Yeah.
Okay. But this idea of alienation, it wasn't just some theoretical abstraction for Marx and Engels, was it? They saw it playing out in the real world.
Exactly. They were observing it directly, particularly in their observations of the working class in England. In a letter from 1858, Engels expressed his kind of frustration with what he called the inertia of English workers, their reluctance to embrace radical change.
So it sounds like they weren't afraid to criticize the workers as well.
Right.
That's not quite the picture we usually get of these revolutionary figures.
Yeah, they weren't afraid to point out shortcomings wherever they saw them.
Yeah.
But their critique came from a place of deep understanding and empathy. They recognized that, the working class was a product of the capitalist system, subject to its alienating effects, just like everyone else.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
It's easy to blame individuals for their circumstances without acknowledging the systemic forces that shape their lives.
And that's exactly what Marx and Engels were trying to do.
Right.
They were trying to expose the systemic nature of capitalism and how it inherently generates alienation.
Yeah.
Not just for workers, but for, everyone trapped within the system.
So alienation isn't just about feeling disconnected from your work. It's about feeling disconnected from society as a whole.
Precisely. It's about feeling like a cog in a machine,
Right.
powerless to change the forces that control your life. You know, in that same letter from 1868, Engels talks about how the workers are treated as the tag, rag, and bobtail of the official parties.
Wow.
He even says that the proletariat has discredited itself terribly. You can really hear the disillusionment and disappointment in his words.
Yeah, it sounds like they were witnessing the alienating effects of capitalism playing out, even within the working class movement itself.
That's right. They saw how capitalism could create divisions and foster a sense of powerlessness,
Yeah.
even among those who are supposed to be fighting against it.
It's almost like capitalism is this invisible force field messing with our minds and relationships.
Yeah.
Is there any way to escape this alienation trap?
Well, that's the question that has fueled debates for, over a century.
Yeah.
And as you might imagine, the answer is complicated.
Okay, I have a feeling things are about to get even more complex.
Yeah.
But I'm ready for it. Let's dive into the it's complicated zone.
So when we talk about solutions to alienation, it's important to remember that Marx and Engels didn't offer like a simple step-by-step guide.
No magic bullet, huh?
Right.
So no 5 easy steps to beat alienation under capitalism.
Right. Their thinking was much more nuanced.
Right.
They saw alienation as like woven into the very fabric of capitalist production.
Like those little air pockets you find in a chocolate bar. You can try to ignore them, but they're always there.
Perfect analogy. And for Marx and Engels, the way to overcome alienation wasn't about individual fixes. It was about changing the structure of society itself.
But we're talking full-on revolution, overthrowing the system.
Well, their views on revolution were complex and developed over time.
Okay.
But they certainly saw it as essential for a truly just and equitable society, one where workers have control over the means of production, over what they create.
So instead of working to make someone else rich, we'd all be working for the common good.
That was the core idea. And this new society wouldn't have the same division of labor that causes, so much alienation. In fact, Engels imagined a world where, and I'm going to quote him here, society regulates the general production and thus makes it possible for me to do one thing today and another tomorrow, to hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon, rear cattle in the evening, criticize after dinner, just as I have a mind, without ever becoming hunter, fisherman, herdsman, or critic.
Wow, that's some serious work-life balance.
Right.
But is that even realistic? I mean, wouldn't things just fall apart if everyone just did whatever they wanted?
That's a common critique, but Marx and Engels believed that when basic needs are met and people have, genuine control over their lives, a new kind of social responsibility would emerge. People would contribute, not out of necessity, but out of a desire to, use their abilities for the benefit of everyone.
So it's not about getting rid of work, but about changing what work means.
Exactly.
And how it fits into our lives.
Exactly. And through that transformation, they believed we could break free from the alienation that capitalism creates.
This deep dive has been eye-opening. It's made me think differently about my own work and how I fit into the bigger picture.
That's the power of these ideas.
Yeah.
They make us question our assumptions and imagine other possibilities.
So where does that leave us? If we're all caught in this system, is there any hope of escaping alienation?
Well, that's the question, that Marx and Engels posed, and it remains relevant today.
Right.
Their work doesn't give us easy answers.
Yeah.
But it gives us this powerful way to understand the problems of capitalism. And imagine a future where people can live more fulfilling, connected lives.
It's not about having all the answers. It's about asking the right questions.
Exactly.
And starting conversations that can lead to, real change.
Yeah.
Maybe as we wrestle with these ideas, we can each find our own ways to lessen the grip of alienation in our own lives.
Absolutely.
Definitely something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.